right, we're still looking at Neanderthal. There's so much evidence counter to the evolutionary point of view and for the creation point of view of Neanderthal being an advanced modern man, not a precursor to modern man. Had greater capacity, as a matter of fact. Modern man devolved from Neanderthal, as a matter of fact. So we're looking at BibleStudyManuals.net, K95.htm. A more recent identification of fossil humans and rickets was made by Francis Ivanhoe in a paper in Nature magazine. Ivanhoe said that every individual Neanderthal child skull studied so far shows signs compatible with severe rickets. And these include the child remains from Engis, Belgium, and from France, Gibraltar, Pech, France, Quina, France, and the U.S.S.R. and Hungary. Less extreme cases are seen in the child remains from another place, Teshik-Tash in the U.S.S.R., and Shanidar, Iraq, and Egbert, Lebanon. The rickets skull morphology seen in these children is carried over into the adult Neanderthals and other fossil humans. The gross bowing of the long bones of the body, so typical as is seen in both Neanderthal children and adults. Rickets gives to the skull and to the long bones of the body the superficial apish cast that the evolutionists were expecting to find in the missing link. So they superimposed that and didn't check on the pathology of the specimens. This could be due to maybe the Ice Age, where lack of sun or lack of good food, vitamin D, causes rickets. There is no excuse for ignoring the large body of evidence of rickets as the more probable explanation for the morphology of many fossil humans, the ones that evolutionists declare that this was a precursor or a preconceived in their own minds kind, a species, before it evolved into man, modern man. Rickets could also explain why fossil populations existed simultaneously all over the world, who had different morphologies because of different diets and climate conditions. Still another possible explanation of the Neanderthal morphology is disease, especially syphilis. D.J.M. Wright, Guy's Hospital Medical School, London, observed that in societies with poor nutrition, rickets and congenital syphilis frequently occur together. The distinction between the two is extremely difficult without modern biochemical, serological, and radiographic aids. D.J.M. Wright, Syphilis and Neanderthal Man. He wrote that in Nature. Based upon his examination of the Neanderthal collection of at the British Museum, Wright found a number of features in Neanderthal's morphology compatible with congenital syphilis. These conditions are seen in both adult and child skulls. Wright specifically mentioned the original Neanderthal skull cap, as well as the Gibraltar II Starosel'e and Pech Neanderthal remains. To suggest that all of the above factors contributed to the Neanderthal morphology would be a case of overkill. However, it is well within reason to suggest that one of them or several in combination are responsible for the whole group of individuals known collectively as Neanderthals. Obviously, to perform controlled experiments on humans today to determine whether factors would produce the skeletal features of the Neanderthals would be both immoral and impossible. But in contrast to the lack of rigorous scientific evidence that mutation and natural selection could produce these effects, there is a sizable body of scientific evidence that suggests one or more of the above-mentioned factors would, indeed, constitute a reasonable and non-evolutionary explanation of the Neanderthal morphology. Dr. Don Patton continues, the Neanderthal fossils were soon to be the missing link. And when that assumption was made, then restorations were made to suit that assumption, which are presently in many museums and many textbooks, and remain there till today. But they are not the correct ones, and not the correct representation of the Neanderthaloid skull. We look, for example, at the modern restorations that were made by Kuhns, an evolutionary anthropologist. Two different restorations of the same skull. One looks like he might belong on Mad Magazine's cover, The other looks very philosophical, might be a representation of Socrates. And we recall Houghton's statement that you can model on the Neandertal's skull the feature of a philosopher or the ligaments of a chimpanzee. Two very contrasting views, one rather intelligent and more human than the one represented in most of the textbooks. We see the unscientific names that Houghton warned us about. Time Life, which is rapidly evolutionary in their philosophy, made this statement about this, the evidence for Neanderthal, and by the way, there are hundreds of skeletons of Neanderthal, but they say a Neanderthaler is a model of evolutionary refinement. Now you see their presumption. It's evolution. Put him in a Brooks Brothers suit and send him down to the supermarket for some groceries, and he might pass completely unnoticed. He might run a little shorter than the clerk serving him, but he would not necessarily be the shortest man in the place. He might be heavier featured, squattier, and more muscular than most, but again, he might no more than the porter handling the beer cases back in the stockroom. I think we see some indications of racism in his description, and that this was typical of early evolutionists, many who prejudiced against blacks. We see that there is a great variety in the world today, as there was in no fossil record. Many humans are very different in appearance. Some of them, you might assume, would be unintelligent, but that is simply not the case. We see variety. That's what's illustrated in the Neandertoid skull. We can summarize the evidence for him this way. Arthritis did cause a stoop in some. He is classed as modern by most anthropologists today. He is indistinguishable in a modern suit from modern man. Howells of Harvard said that Neanderthal's brain was larger than ours. Whereas the average European brain is 1400 cc, Neanderthal averaged around 1600 cc. Now we look at Rhodesian man. Let's move on from Neanderthal. And the rest of the so-called archaic Homo sapiens. A relatively new category has been established by paleoanthropologists. Archaic Homo sapiens. This category includes a minimum of 49 fossil individuals who do not fit into either the Neanderthal or the Homo erectus categories. The reasons are that, 1, they have a somewhat different skull morphology from Neanderthals. Many of this group are dated much earlier than the classic Neanderthals, although more than half of them are Neanderthal contemporaries. And they have a cranial capacity that is too large for them to be classified as Homo erectus. Too large. In the past, members of this group have been given various names, such as anti-Neanderthals or pre-Neanderthals, Neandertaloids, or African Neanderthals. Some people have suggested that the entire category be given the scientific name Homo sapiens rhodesianus, after the best-known fossil in this category, Rhodesian man. In the most general sense, the archaic Homo sapiens category can be described as follows. A low, sloping skull with a cranial capacity of from approximately 1100 to 1300 cc. Very heavy ridges over the eyes, especially true in Rhodesian man. The rear of the skull more rounded and lacking in the Neanderthal bun. It doesn't have the Neanderthal bun. Large, long faces with jaws that jut forward, and postcranial body bones that are essentially either indistinguishable from modern humans or very different from modern humans, depending upon which paleoanthropologist is doing the describing. Wow, it's like three actors giving their own interpretation of the same thing. In reality, the taxon archaic Homo sapiens is a taxon of convenience. A heterogeneous assortment of fossils was dumped into this category because the fossils did not fit elsewhere. By making a taxon of this assortment, evolutionists attempted to give it the appearance of a transitional group between Homo erectus and Neanderthal, or between Homo erectus and anatomically modern Homo sapiens. That's us. However, the dating of these fossils by evolutionists themselves reveals that this is not a true picture. These fossils date from the most recent ones at 5,000 years ago, all the way back to the oldest ones at 700,000 years ago on the evolution timescale. Some of these species that are inferior are hanging around a bit too long to prove evolution right. This chronological spread reveals that these fossil individuals were not part of an evolutionary sequence, but were instead contemporaries of Homo erectus. They're all the same species, Neandertal included, and anatomically modern Homo sapiens. There is no evolution. They're all the same. Just as they have a few different details here and there. I've seen people with a big jaw, and I've seen people with a little jaw. Big heads, little heads. Some are on the football field. The dating and morphology of this category helped to falsify the concept of human evolution and served to demonstrate the wide degree of skeletal and cranial diversity that is found in the human family. Modern man. We can find them today. Just go to Alaska. PITHECANTHROPUS, ERECTUS, Homo erectus, Java man, and Peking man. Lebanon, his great book, Bones of Contention. The story of the group of fossils called Homo erectus by evolutionists begins with Java man, he says. They called him the ape man and told us that he was our evolutionary ancestor. The artist's drawings of that beetle-browed, jaw-jutting fellow were quite convincing. In fact, the vast majority of people who believed in human evolution were probably first sold on it by this convincing salesman. Not only is he the best-known human fossil, he is the one of the only human fossils most people know. The story has been told many times. Before the turn of the century, a Dutch anatomist, Eugene Dubois, went to the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, in search of the missing link between apes and humans. In 1891, along the bank of the Starosel'e River in Java, he found a skullcap that seemed to him to have a combination of human and ape features. A year later, about 50 feet away, he found a thigh bone, a femur, a very human appearance. That he assumed belonged to the skullcap. Dubois named his transitional form, which is now dated by evolutionists at about 500,000 years, Pithecanthropus erectus. However, to the general public, he was always, will always be known affectionately as Java man, because Java man was found so long ago, and because another like him, Peking man, was not found until 1929, and because he was made to fit the evolutionary picture so beautifully, Java man is virtually synonymous in the popular man with, in the mind of popular man, with human evolution. Pithekos is the Greek word for ape. Anthropos is the Greek word for man. Erectus means erect. Hence the name means erect ape man. Make up a fancy name like that and it seems to stick. Who cares about the facts? Dubois claimed that the skullcap and the femur came from a rock stratum known as the Trinial Layer, named after a nearby village in central Java. He believed that these rocks were below what is known as the Pleistocene tertiary boundary. Dubois was convinced the real humans evolved later in the Middle Pleistocene. Hence, his dating of Java man was quite appropriate for a missing link. However, his interpretation was not exactly straightforward, as the man who later found other Java men, G.H.R. von Koenigswald, tells us, when Dubois issued the first description of the fossil Javanese fauna, he designated it in Pleistocene. That's where it belongs, he said. But no sooner had he discovered his Pithecanthropus than the fauna had suddenly to become tertiary. He had to change it. He did everything in his power to diminish the Pleistocene character of the fauna. The criterion was no longer to be the fauna as a whole, but only as his PITHECANTHROPUS